Good morning and good night. Thanks again for downloading the Body Snatchers podcast. And when you listen, stream, or download straight to your device, Castbox is your best option. Remember, if you like what you hear today, don't forget to subscribe and comment. So let's get started. Enjoy the show.
Good morning, good night. Thank you for choosing the Body Snatchers podcast. Tino, that is me, hanging out with Gia. Gia, that is her.
That's me. Tis me.
Tis I.
Tis I.
God.
The Raven.
If you guys are new to the channel, please hit the subscribe button. We really appreciate it. Here we like to talk about all sorts of nerdy stuff. So if you like video games, anime, hate Xbox, love Xbox, stuff like that.
Putting hate reacts on Tino's posts.
Woo, I'm gonna have to tag him in that. That's kind of an inside joke. We do have a Body Snatchers group on Facebook, so if you want to be a part of that chaos, please join. You're more than welcome, but it's a little savage. And also, if you guys are new, head over to bodysnatchersmedia.com. We're on all different social network platforms, sometimes Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram.
That person that runs that right now is kind of neither here nor there.
We're going to fire him soon, so if you guys are looking for a Snapchat job for Body Snatchers, please.
You don't get paid, though. You just get paid and knowing that the fans will respond to you.
We're really good at building up self-esteem, so if you do a good job, we'll make sure to get you a gold star. So, getting to the point of today's little snippet, Sony has announced that they are going to be opening up a studio and start turning video games into movies.
Yes.
I feel indifferent. How do you feel, Gia?
I feel excited. How you feel indifferent?
Well,
I don't understand.
There's like a lot of ways that it could go. So part of me is kind of excited just because, like, let's take Marvel, for instance. When superhero movies were trying to come up off the ground, they were just garbage all the way through. All the 90s Batman films I pretty much hated. The original Superman film was kind of cool until he took the S and threw a magic S on... I forget who the hell was even in it. Christopher Reeves. It was a lot. I wasn't with it. It's really weird. Family Guy had made fun of it some years ago, and it was hilarious to me. But Daredevil, all that stuff, we talked about that a little bit last week, and it was just like, meh. And then, 2008's Iron Man hit, and it's just been like smooth sailing, and we've seen a lot of other companies occasionally have similar success with movies, and that's awesome. But with video games, it hasn't been as consistent for me. I don't know. That's just how I feel.
For video game movies, yes, that's normally because it's a different outside studio trying to make a screenplay for a game that exists. And I feel like this is different because just as you mentioned with Marvel and just superhero movies in general, when Marvel made Marvel Studios and started taking ownership of the movies that they were making, they started to become better. That's not saying that all of the Marvel movies are better because we all know the travesty that is the X-Men films. But I feel like Sony creating their own studio for this and focusing on them, like the people working that are familiar with these stories that we know and love, that they've made video game wise, and them actually putting the effort into translating it to a movie would work out so much better because you have these people. And it's not like some outside source that's like, oh, I just loved playing this game. I can be an expert too, but you actually have the experts now that will be working on this stuff. So I think that's what makes it completely different than like past video game movies that come out. Because again, like for instance, the Sonic the Hedgehog movie that everybody complained, the studio into fixing how Sonic looked. I mean, if it was probably Sega or anything related to the people who initially created the game, it probably would have come out a whole lot better. It wouldn't have been like, a humanoid hedgehog looking thing with just like real people, arms and legs. It would have looked probably more like Sonic actually looks.
Okay, I mean, and I can see that. But even still, like Sony, when it comes to making movies, hasn't been very, very consistent. And before I get into some of the movies that I think were failures and movies that I think were successful done by Sony. One thing that I am interested in is kind of the delivery of the way that Sony wants to do this. For better or worse, they kind of went out of their way to saying they don't just intend to make movies, but they intend to make movies that are going to kind of work with the video game. So when I say that, kind of what I'm getting at is they're not necessarily making a video game adaptation like where they're just trying to give you the 40, 50-hour story that you've already gotten. Their whole intention is like, okay, so say you, let's pick a basic game like, let's say God of War 4 in my background. God of War 4, and their intention is, during the time that it takes to make God of War 5, let's say that, they do intend to do this like they said. They want to make a movie that's going to fill in the space between 4 and 5. And they want to do this for most, if not all, video games. And I think that that's kind of cool because now you're, like me, I get really, really invested in the stories of these video games. Lore is like my favorite thing. So for stories that I'm super invested in, to find out that it's not an option of like, check it out if you want to, but you kind of have to go and see a movie to get the full, circle of everything. That excites me as a fan, if it's done right. I don't know. I'm sure you probably came across that. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, that'll be pretty exciting. And I do like that also that they're going that route versus like recreating a video game as a movie, because obviously we already know what's going on with that. But I just wanted to touch on the comment you made about like other movies that Sony's made that weren't that great. So I'm just going to throw it out there. We have the old Spider-Man movies, which weren't bad, but they weren't great either. And as a kid watching them, like with Tobey Maguire, I loved them as a kid, but going back and watching it as an adult, I find all the nuances that I just don't like. And I'm just like, why was this great when I was a kid? But it's the same thing with X-Men and Fox.
Do you think it's safe to say, not to cut you off, but that maybe you only feel that way because they're a bit dated? Was it really as corny as you think? Because I think
no, it wasn't just being corny. It was that the story wasn't that great to me. Because I know, like, Spider-Man's one of those characters that gets rebooted all the time. So obviously, there's different stories. There's different origin stories. I mean, you have the same base. He gets bit by a spider, but then they retronym, not retronym. That's for words. But they just kind of go back and they just reboot it basically.
Right.
It was the overall storytelling for it that I didn't quite like once I got into it, and 3 was just a travesty overall. Like, the only thing cool about that was Eddie Brock, and that's terrible. But with that being said, it's not their, like, yes, it's still Sony doing these video game movies, but it's going to be the folks that focus on the video games. It's not going to be them hiring some screenwriter, just to come in and try to translate these. And that's what I think is going to be different for these versus the games or the movies that they've previously brought out from like things that they own, like the Spider-Man series. It's going to be the people that actually are working on the video games, working on these movies now. And I think that's what's going to make a big difference between the movies that they have been making in comparison with these whenever they get to it.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. And it's like when you going back to my first statement, and comparing them to Marvel Studios, Marvel was in a weird spot, obviously where they were, contracting everything out, and other studios were making their movies and kind of butchering them. But again, I mean,
kind of.
I feel like it would be safe to say that, not even necessarily saying story, but just like if you look at the first half of the MCU, kind of where they started building everything up, like it was very, very solid. But I feel like they've gotten to the point to where they can pump these things out so easily, and that comes with experience, with trial and error. And with Sony, I think that they have quite a few errors. So I mean, it's kind of all up from here.
Lying.
But there's like some really cool stuff that they have made. Like talking about Spider-Man, like as the three of them as a whole, going back to was it 2000, 2001, Tobey Maguire, I really enjoyed all of those movies. I mean, obviously the third one, there's that cringy scene with, Tobey Maguire, we all know. But outside of
it's
that,
not just that whole movie, the whole time he's emo is cringy. Like, they didn't have to make him angsty just because he had the symbiote. Like, that was just ridiculous, and it made me mad.
Yeah, well, that's why I made my dated comment earlier, though, because they kind of went and what was big, that whole goth emo-y thing around then.
It wasn't just that was around when like Panic at the Disco and Fall Out Boy and everything were starting to become popular, and that was kind of like the style they had about themselves as
right.
Well. But
and that's what
that's different. That's the music. That's like like when teenagers are listening to the music being sad, they don't want to watch Spider-Man and be sad.
Right, but what I'm saying is that's what happens when you have people who are out of touch with what's going on, trying to pretend to be in touch, in charge of that. You get what I'm like? You know what I mean? Like that was their interpretation. They're like, oh yeah, that's what the kids are doing. No, and we knew that back then, but it didn't hurt as much. Now it does. But there's good things that they've done too. Like for instance, Sony did The Crow, and I actually forgot that. I had to look that up. And granted, that obviously wasn't based on a video game, but I think that's probably one of the best, films ever made. Granted, I know it's
comics. I believe it was based on comics.
But
I could be wrong. I think I remember there being a comic for The Crow. I remember reading one at the very least, and maybe it came after the movie, but I believe the movie was based on the comic.
That's what I was going to add. I honestly can't remember off the top if the comic came after because the movie did so well or vice versa. But either way, I mean, it was really well done, and that was something put in place, by Sony. And they've had a handful of things that have come through. And I think that one thing that you can't really take away from Sony is their special effects. Their special effects are usually pretty good. So they know what they're doing in that, right? But at the end of the day, like I said, for me, a good story is the most important thing. So I'm just anxious to see, can they capture, what we got in God of War 4 and so many other titles that have came out and bring
and bridge the gap.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, we'll see. I mean, I'm curious to see, what people out there, think. If you guys are listening, what kind of games would you like to see? I for one would love to see, them go back to some throwbacks like Medieval and Spyro and Siphon Filter. Like,
oh man,
I would be like, what?
Now, and here's the thing, is it going to be just like games that are Sony exclusive that are just like made by Sony, or are they going to be able to get copyright info for things like the Final Fantasy games? Are they going to be able to get it for, like, for instance, the one that I have picture behind me? Like, it's a different production studio overall, but I mean, it's still like a Sony exclusive. So that would be really cool because, I would love to see a Bloodborne movie, just kind of maybe either building up to where you are when the game starts or like going from where the game ends. And that would even be cool for like Dark Souls. So I don't know. I'm excited. I'm excited to see where this is going to go.
Crash Bandicoot the movie.
Just put your bum ass in his Crash.
That dude was so thirsty.
He was.
So, all right, guys, if you find some time, just comment, let us know, what games you'd like to see. If you agree with some of our opinions, disagree. I mean, it's fine. Everybody's entitled to their opinions. They're wrong, but we...
Unless you're Ben Young, you know who you're talking about.
Oh, God, not him. Anybody but Satan himself.
You have an opinion and it immediately disagrees with my opinion? You're wrong.
My opinion is entirely different, and now I'm going to make accusations. Tino, you've never read a Superman comic. If you don't like them, it must be because you never read them, you monster.
If he's born, you don't know Superman. Okay.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for sitting with us, and take care.
Bye.